Unhoused. Okay, let's get started. Welcome everybody to this part of the GECO speaker series, Gender Realities in the Unhoused. And go to the Gender Equality Coalition of Ontario's YouTube channel to see video recordings of the previous speakers series events that we've had. Of course, the Gender Equality Coalition of Ontario, or GECO for short, strives to achieve gender justice in a manner that is intentionally intersectional and inclusive. We fight to end all forms of gender oppression. My name is Jeff Pereira. I am a speaker writer who talks about healthy masculinities across Turtle Island, North America. I'm also on the board for GECO, and I'm really pleased to help get things started today for this really important and I think it's going to be a dynamic conversation. To get things started in a good way, as a settler here on these lands, I'd like to share GECO's land commitment with you. We acknowledge that we gather, organize, and build community on Indigenous land stewarded since time immemorial by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, the Anishinaabe, the Attawandarak, and the Mississauga Nation. Today, this land is governed by ongoing treaty relationships, including Treaty 2, Treaty 6, the Longwoods Treaty, and Treaty 29. We honor the sovereignty of the Chippewandas, of the Thames First Nation, Munsee Delaware Nation, the Oneida Nation of the Thames, and recognize that these nations continue to protect their cultures, communities, and lands despite generations of colonial harm. We also honor the Dish with One Spoon Wamput Covenant, which teaches that all who share this territory have a responsibility to care for the land and water together, taking only what we need, ensuring there's enough for future generations, and upholding relationships grounded in respect rather than domination. These teachings reflect the gender balance, gender diversity, and collective responsibility that existed here long before colonialization imposed patriarchal systems that continue to harm Indigenous women, girls, two-spirit, trans, and gender diverse people. Colonization disrupted these systems of reciprocity, responsibility, and gender sovereignty. Today, Indigenous women are approximately 3 times more likely to experience violence, victimization, and 60% have experienced physical or sexual assault. These realities are not accidents. They're the result of systemic racism, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia embedded in colonial structures. Water injustice is part of this ongoing harm. Communities such as the Neshkantaga First Nation, which endured some of the longest boil water advisories in Canadian history, continue to face violations of basic human rights. Even locally, Indigenous families experience water insecurity. A powerful reminder that there can be no gender equality or gender equity without water sovereignty, land sovereignty, and the protection of Indigenous rights. We acknowledge that the work of our organization takes place throughout Ontario on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations under numerous historic treaties and agreements. We recognize the ongoing leadership, knowledge, and rights of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples across this province. As we carry out our work, we commit to strengthening our relationships with Indigenous communities, advancing reconciliation through action, and ensuring that our programs and advocacy respect, reflect accountability, and shared responsibility. As the Gender Equality Coalition of Ontario and Rainbow Connections, we commit to standing against gender-based violence and naming its colonial roots, supporting Indigenous-led healing and justice initiatives, and listening when Indigenous communities tell us what they need. Advocating for clean water, land protection, and environmental justice, recognizing these as essential to gender equality. Creating safer, inclusive spaces for Indigenous youth, especially two-spirit and gender-diverse youth, to learn, lead, and thrive. Challenging colonial systems that create inequalities in housing, healthcare, education, policing, and child welfare. educating ourselves and our communities about truths deliberately excluded from mainstream narratives, including pre-colonial gender diversity, sovereignty, and balanced governed systems. This is an acknowledgement. This commitment is not a script, it's a commitment to action, to honor the treaties and covenants, to protect the land and water, to stand with Indigenous peoples, to pursue gender justice and community care, to build relationships rooted in accountability, solidarity, and hope. So, once again, welcome to those just joining us. This is the January portion of our discussions in the GECO Speaker Series. And this event today is on gendered realities and the unhoused. So now I'd like to pass things along to our moderator for the evening, who will introduce our guests and guide us through the conversation. I'm very excited to introduce Shreya Shidambi. Shreya is a fourth-year health science student at Western University, hoping to pursue a career in healthcare. Driven by her interest in gender and sexual equity, she's doing a placement here with GECO, and at GECO, she helps program this speaker series event. And when she can, she enjoys volunteering at Inova as a child care volunteer. With that, take it away, Shreya.
Thank you, Jeff, for that lovely introduction. Okay, let's get started. I'm gonna start off by reading the speaker bios so the audience can familiarize themselves with the panelists. So, Ray Fangrad is a registered social service worker and is currently a program manager at the Inn St. Thomas-Elgin, which is a low-barrier emergency shelter. His interest in gender equity intersects in his work with unhoused people and his own experiences as a queer person. Ray spends his time away from work volunteering with 2S LGBTQIA+ youth. Shelley Yeo worked in the gender-based violence and children's services for over 40 years. She is the co-founder and co-chair of All Our Sisters and has been a member of many community committees, including the London Homeless Coalition and the London Coordinating Committee to End Women Abuse. Shelley is happily retired and finds joy in her garden and with family and friends. She continues to work with All Our Sisters and sits on a couple of boards. I'm just going to jump in here and thank All Our Sisters for partnering with us tonight. All right, so next, Sister Joan Atkinson, CSJ, is a founding director and is presently the president of the London Affordable Housing Foundation. She has been involved with all of LAHF's projects in a fundraising and project development capacity. Sister Joan has also served as a volunteer on the planning committee of 2 national housing conferences, All Our Sisters National Network on Women and Homelessness. She has worked as an educator with the London and Middlesex Catholic School Board and at the University of St. Michael's College in Toronto, the Faculty of Education at the University of Toronto, and has served on the leadership team of the Sisters of St. Joseph in Canada. All of this work grows out of a basic belief that everyone deserves dignity and has a right for safe housing. Okay, awesome. Let's begin the panel, and please, if anyone in the audience wants to pitch in with any questions or insights, feel free. Okay, so the first question in GECO tradition is, what does gender justice mean to you? And whoever wants to start can go ahead.
Okay. Well, for me, it's and I say this sometimes on my bio, it's a world where everyone has a right to freedom, where everyone has a right to freedom from violence and to make their own choices and decisions around biology, healthcare, finance issues, all of those things. And that our rights are not, and safety are not limited. And I could probably go on, but I'll just let others fill in.
Okay, I'll follow you, Shelley. Some may think it's kind of strange that somebody who comes out of the Catholic tradition, which hasn't always been the lens out in the world that is very well understood. But I think I find my values around gender justice rooted in the scriptures of my faith. Values such as love, compassion, inclusiveness, and understanding. There's great diversity throughout the world. We cannot and should not all think alike. I think when we come up against those folks who think differently, who look differently, whose lifestyle is different than ours, there's a way in which we want to put the blame on them. But as I have lived my life and interacted with many diverse communities, I discover that really what I'm trying to protect myself if I am in front of something I don't know or understand, I try to hide my fear or my ignorance, sometimes not even to know how to ask questions or how to invite somebody to share their perspective. And I think the more we can acknowledge our own biases and limitations when we're dealing with things like gender bias or gender different lifestyles, I think what we have to do is look in first at what we are thinking and feeling about this, and not project it out onto somebody who looks different or who acts differently or who lives differently than I do. I think the world would be a much safer and better place for all of us if we could grow in those attitudes and capacities in us. So that's enough to get me started.
Yeah, I'll just, give my piece. Gender justice to me is all about what is the best for that person with their own autonomy. My needs will not be the same as your needs, um, when it comes to justice, it means different things to different people. And we have to do our best to work together as a society as a whole with each unique person, identity, group, whatever it may be, to make sure we all have our autonomy, to make decisions that work best for us as people and continue to address and build upon the work that's already been done. There's not really a stopping point for me when I think about gender justice. There's not a singular, point where say, oh, yes, we've reached gender justice. That's not where we're at. And, it's a journey. As we learn more about other people, as we, changes in our society and, our world, it's gonna keep, we got to keep moving forward. So, I see it as, a progressive, goal. Because justice might, look different in a different time period, right? Like our laws are change, our society changes, right? So it's just a continuous process of reflection and listening, having compassion and respecting autonomy. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, it's very much an ongoing process. Okay, thank you. So while we did read your bios to help introduce you all, we'd love for each of you to take some time and tell us about what got you into the work that you do.
Okay, well, I'll jump in. I started teaching high school. I finished my undergrad degree, went to teachers college, and began working with teenagers. Teenagers are that stage in life where all of us have been there at one point, but it's when we become aware of who we are as individuals. Gender is a big thing, a big issue. Our sexuality is another huge area that we begin to explore at that age. And I saw that happening with the students I taught. I played sports coached them in many of the sports. And I saw kids struggling. I saw kids bullying one another at times. I saw kids putting up divisions if they had a sense that somebody was very different in how they identified with how they were. It was not easy back in those days, and that was in the 70s. People didn't talk about gender diversity. It was as if our roles as men and women were static. You just had to find the right textbook and read about it and then put those descriptions into practice in our lives. And I think as we live and interact with more and more diverse people, we begin to realize that all of us are growing and learning and being exposed in different ways. I saw kids who were beginning to question whether they were male or female or what kinds of relationships they wanted to be in, and were absolutely terrified to open a discussion with their parents. And some of them who did try to do that ended up being really expelled from the family at that time. And I saw the pain and, just their educational pursuits, those goals that they wanted, go out the door because they had to find a way to keep body and soul together and a roof over their heads if they could. I saw the damage when we can't accept each other in our diversity. And I don't mean somebody who's being cruel versus somebody being nice. It's about people who are being excluded from the opportunities that life can offer us, especially when we're young. And I saw young people who were struggling to know how to even present themselves. I did a program through the Toronto School of Theology with people, many of them were ordained people within their traditions, wanting to be able to explore this because they had parishioners or people from their faith communities coming to them and wanting to try to talk about what they were experiencing and feeling and hoping or angry about. And there weren't very many safe venues that they could do that. So my experience went on as I did more work in adult education, discovering many of the same things. One of the places here in London that I think has found a pretty good balance, particularly with young people, is YOU, Youth Opportunities Unlimited. Many of the people who work there are people themselves who had to struggle to figure out where they could fit in. But I also realized that there were retired teachers and healthcare workers who were helping these people one-on-one move through the multiple questions and health issues and education opportunities that they thought were lost to them. And I think when people can accompany these folks bit by bit, one by one, they begin to discover their own worth and feel comfortable with how they identify themselves. Coming to terms with anybody's sexuality is a long journey. It doesn't happen at 13 or 15 or 20. It's a journey that we discover bit by bit through the multiple relationships and people we meet on life's journey. So I've had gay and transgender people teach me all kinds of things that I hadn't even imagined because I hadn't been exposed to what they were experiencing. So if we can learn from one another, I think that's a huge piece.
Well said. Yeah.
Yeah, so what got me into this work and this interest is really, I don't know, just from I feel like since I was existing, I have just cared for people and cared about justice and fairness. Like I'm sure if you ask, anybody, they'd say, you really got upset when something was unfair as a child. And that's just how I'm built. I just see inequity. I see, something hurtful, something wrong. Like, why aren't we doing something? I had that, fire in me since I remember, right? So I tried some different, careers out of high school, but then I really was like, this is not fulfilling. So then I went to college again to do social service work. And then I found my way into the working with the unhoused population. And I've always done some, volunteering with youth, especially queer youth. But in my work, it just I want to say I fell into it, but I really didn't. I have worked really closely with a lot of people and built relationships and tried to, understand where we're at and how can we go forward. What do I need to understand to continue to support people? And as changes to, policy to, funding, all that, I realize, this I'm just attracted to trying to be kind. I don't, trying to be the best, representation of what humanity could be. And that just kind of just keeps me going. I don't know, it's just a passion I have in the background, right? And it hopefully comes forth through my work, even in the smallest tasks.
Yeah, definitely. It's like when you see some kind of equity, you feel inequity, sorry, you feel like a pit in your stomach, right? You want to help change it and improve it.
Sometimes a little bit of a righteous anger, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I was also one of those teenagers and kids or whatever who was stomping around wondering why I didn't have the same rights as men and boys at the time. I mean, that's the way, it was fairly men, women, boys, and girls at the time. We're talking the 60s and 70s. And so I didn't get a lot of support for it, but I also didn't stop ranting and raving about it. Anyway, as I was moving along, and I happened to be apprenticing with an artist and needed some money while I was doing my apprenticeship. I managed to get a job at Vanier working with adolescent kids who were in care. And it was a huge eye opener for me because I came from, even though I ranted and raved, I still came from a very privileged environment, but also sheltered in a way that I didn't realize that people had those kinds of experiences. Or it was them or the others, and so it was really eye opening, and then I started working at a residential service that used to be called Belton House. It's now called Ways, and it's a very large organization. But at the time, it was a 14-bed residential service for young women, and it was a beautiful service that we were able to offer voluntary for girls who were, when I first started, it was, I think, 14 to 21. I was 23 or 24 at the time, so I was like 5 minutes ahead of them. But developmentally, these were young women who didn't have the same experiences and advantages that I did. So 21 maybe in age, but developmentally not. And then the age changed because the provincial rules changed, and so they were younger. But nevertheless, I met young women from all over who voluntarily stayed at the group home. They didn't have anywhere else to go other than maybe the streets because they couldn't be at home. They didn't have family or anybody else supporting them. So I think at the time we were providing a trauma and violence informed service. We didn't know that that was indeed that it was, but when I think back, that's what we were providing. And it was a safe environment for young women to make their own decisions about what they wanted to do, where they wanted to go, who they wanted to be. And many of them I see in community now. I work with them. They've worked side by side with me. And I see them, somebody came up to at the coffee shop, and I thought, wow, that was 45 years ago or something like that. And from there, I started working in shelter services for women identified and their families, and transitional housing. And when the shelter started, when we ended up sort of taking on second stage housing and providing transitional housing for families, that's when I really dug in and began to learn much more about what was going on in our community and sitting at the tables related to insecurity of housing, folks who were unhoused, what was going on for, policies, community plans, and those kinds of things. And so I, sat at tables where traditionally shelter folks, especially women's shelters, because we were funded differently. We were funded through the province, not the city. And so we traditionally did not sit at those tables. And sometimes we were the only one, like if it was me or one of my colleagues, we were the only one at that table representing the folks that we were serving in our shelters and our transitional housing. So that's how I really started digging into those issues and meeting folks who were experiencing being unhoused, who were experiencing and hearing their stories, especially from women identified folks, gender diverse folks, hearing their stories of what it was like to be unhoused, to have insecurity of housing. And when you hear those stories, it's hard not to participate, not to, want to help in some way, to want to change policy and practices in our community plans. So I ended up being involved locally, provincially, nationally, and then somehow we ended up having organizing a national conference called All Our Sisters, related to women and insecurity of housing from coast to coast to coast, and met people from all over the country and hearing their stories, which differed because of the vastness of our country, its geography, and all of that. So it was such a privilege. And then we did it again. And then we did it again only just for one day and more locally, which was, again, a real privilege to be able to meet with women, women identified and gender diverse folks in London who, especially after that COVID experience, lockdown experience, having that, hearing their stories and helping to provide a platform for them to tell those stories to others, to folks who are making decisions, to the service providers, the researchers, the politicians, and bureaucrats. So helping those folks to, again, get their stories out and feel that they mattered, that who they are, what they did, that their experiences and the stories that they tell will make a difference for other folks. So I guess that's what gives me has given me the energy to want to participate in, and I continue to, even though I'm retired, I do continue to participate in some of those activities. And I just know people now. When we had a meeting yesterday, the All Our Sisters had it was more of a festive gathering with food and um, you know, chatting and that kind of thing. And it was so nice. We talked about how we can walk down the street now and we feel like we're our own little club because we know who we meet once in a while together, and we know one another, and it just feels really good to know that those folks are there. We know one another, we're supported, and that that those folks are supported too. So yeah, it's I feel like I kind of fell in, and then I never and I stayed.
You
I
haven't
dug
fallen
in.
out yet.
I dug in. Yeah, yeah, happily.
Okay, awesome. Everyone brought in such a unique perspective. It's going to make for a really interesting discussion. Okay, so this next question is a bit larger, but take it on with points that you think we should be aware of. So please talk to us about the systemic causes and consequences of housing insecurity and how gender shapes experiences of being unhoused and access to services.
Ray, do you want to start this time?
All right. Being blindfolded, no, I appreciate it. So that is a big question because there's so many different directions and paths you could go with that thought because I don't know, my brain is like a web of connected dots sometimes when I, have to navigate our systems when it comes to funding, changes to policy, who is reaching out about what community you're working in and who you're partnering with. And
Yeah.
yeah, I have to pause and think sometimes to get my thoughts, which I'm sure everyone can appreciate. So I think one thing that people might not realize if they're out of this field or have never had an experience where they've been unhoused or had precarious housing or were at risk or having to, couch surf, whatever it may be, that experience doesn't just leave once you have housing. That is a part of your experience now. And, I think a misunderstanding, with the probably broader public is, oh yeah, just, once you're in a home, things will just, happen. You'll just, you're stable now. Great. It's that trauma and that instability, follows you like poverty. It's generational. Like it continues to affect you, and especially women and uh vulnerable folks, people are gender diverse, indigenous folks, two-spirit folks, we see there's just another layer on top of that. That's that intersectional piece, right? If say I'm unhoused, I'm looking for an apartment, I'm a white man. It's a little, I can just, I'll walk up to the apartment and the landlord, whatever, the tour, it's a different experience than if you're, in a more vulnerable state, especially if the person you're trying to rent from or, has biases because we know everybody does. And especially people with disability, there's racism is a huge factor there. Like there's so many layers that shape someone's individual experience. But the reality is, and something important is with the, saying, everyone's unique and they have unique needs. But I guess, there's a trend, we see and we know people are treated differently, and have stereotypes. They're, excluded and isolated from certain, basic human needs, because some other person, with power has said no, or I'm just gonna ignore you, oh, job applications, all that, we see that it's well, studied, but we have like taking action in that area. There's so many different levels to address these issues. Like you have to start from the top, and then who is enforcing it? If it's a private landlord, you know, who is really saying, actually, you are, being racist, you're being misogynistic, you're excluding people because of your own opinions and stuff. So hopefully my long-winded answer helps you see my perspective. But yeah, it's not simple and there's no one answer, but the intensity of the issue and the layers to it, I don't think are fully understood by, people that maybe don't see how internally, how number one, how difficult it is to like even get, subsidy or crisis, resources for people. In that point, they don't see those layers that we have to dig through with somebody. And I can't imagine some people, because they have to do it on their own, some people, having to navigate it on your own. Anyway, I'll let someone else jump in.
I oh
Oh, go ahead, Shelley.
yeah, I was going to speak to maybe some of the historical political decisions that have been made over the years. So just in the last, and I know for every decade, you could go back as far as you want, but when I think about the 90s and then into whatever you call the zeros, um, there were some decisions made provincially and federally that have dramatically affected the lives of folks who, in deinstitutionalization, for example, without a plan. I'm not sure what they were thinking, where people were going to go, because they ended up on this. Many people ended up on the streets. Many people ended up without supports and for addiction, mental health, and physical health issues. But really short-sighted, huge decisions that were short-sighted because our political parties only think 3 or 4 years ahead. They only think about their one term. I mean, they think perhaps maybe going a little further, but their plans only go for 4 years, whether it's local or provincial or federal. And so I think that those kinds of big decisions make a huge. And Joan and I were talking yesterday, because we got to chat yesterday. We were talking about our community plans, how we put so much effort into them, and yet we don't start talking about a winter plan until November of the year that we need it. And it happens every single year. It's like, it's going to get cold. It's going to get hot in the summer and cold in the winter. And we don't have any plans that are sustainable. And it almost feels like it's getting worse. And then we had a 5-year period where everything changed. The lockdown changed everything. I was still working in residential services for a part of that time, and immediately everything changed, as you probably well know, in the work that you were doing too. So I think that the decline in social housing investment, for sure, and Joan could speak to that probably better than I could. Lack of and the sort of the feeling where housing is no longer a right, or I'm not sure that we've ever made it a right, but why do we have to even advocate for that? But that continues. Like, these are things that we've been talking about since I can remember. Over to you, Joan.
Okay, thanks, Shelley. I agree. Our planning around housing, first of all, it can't happen quickly, and it never happens quickly enough for the need that is right in front of us. And that's part of the struggle, I think, because people don't plan when they will become homeless. Like, I'm involved in some of the redevelopment of the former Victoria Hospital lands, and 5 nonprofits were trying to build about 650 new homes, apartment buildings, and not great big high rises, but 5 stories high. And but what I realized, we started working on that plan in 2018. And here we are at 2026. And only 2 of those buildings are complete. The rest, 2 more will be complete probably by the spring or approaching summer. And only half of them, only enough money, the government will only allow us to apply for enough money to make about half of those affordable, because we have to pay the money back to the government once the building is completed and rented up, and we have to maintain it. So there's lots of pieces involved in the housing piece. I think the other thing that has to happen if lower income people are going to succeed in maintaining and keeping their housing is there needs to be a little bit more programming and contact with those people in an ongoing way. I can rent an apartment to somebody, and then there I can tick off one more name on my list of people who have called looking for housing. But I have learned over the years that actually they're desperate for more than just a roof over their head. Many of them are desperate for connection in the community, connection with whether it's other tenants living in the building, whether it's connection with some of the opportunities that might be available out there. And that takes time and planning to do that. And when I got involved in this, how I got involved was somebody died and left the sisters a large bequest of money. And we didn't know, we certainly wanted, and it was just identified to use it for the poor. We didn't know what that meant exactly. So we formed a committee, and we did research, and we talked to people from coast to coast to coast. And everybody came back and said housing was the first need. You have to address the housing need. But once you find housing or build housing for somebody, you can't just put them in there and give them the key to lock their door, because life is much more complex, and it should be in relationship to all kinds of other things that are happening in the community. And what we're learning after, making a few mistakes along the way is that we do have to build ways to bring these people together. Shelley talked about the little social we had with some of the All Our Sisters group. Most of these are women who've had trauma after trauma after trauma in their lives. They're not going to have their act all together the first time you put them in an apartment. What you need to do is slowly walk with some of them. And it's, I can't do this all by myself. We need other people and other agencies and libraries and other folks to help them begin to build relationships. And I don't mean lifelong, but friendships, or to know where they can get resources. The Canadian Mental Health, the office here in London, did a fundraiser before Christmas, because we found out that there was no, the only shelter beds for women, particularly who were on the street, was in one of Salvation Army. And this is not to dish any of those services, but if you're a woman on the street alone, it's not safe. They will tell you it is not safe to go into some of these places by themselves. So a little committee made up of a whole lot smarter people than I am, decided that we had to do something. We asked the city, we asked the province for money, and we got nothing. So at my sister's place, they gave us space to provide overnight accommodation for women who had nowhere else to go. And we did some fundraising, and we raised enough money the first night, and it was just a little barbecue and social and to show people what it was. And we called the event the Girls' Night Out. And we said, for most of us, the Girls' Night Out, it means very different than if you were living on the street, what a girls' night out might be for you. Most of us haven't had that experience, fortunately. People responded enthusiastically, and now they have resting places for them at, we can't call them shelter and we can't call them beds, so we're simply calling it resting places. Like, this is where language and government regulations, you know, really mess us up in trying to do good sometimes. And so they could come in, they have a place to rest, they can shower, they can do laundry. There is a nurse practitioner and a social worker there with them. We had enough money to hire those for particularly the winter months, as we're waiting to see if we can continue to keep raising money and leave these spaces available all year round. So things like that, and those are ordinary people in the community who want to respond to a need that they see. Sometimes they can't do it themselves, but when we come together, we can do much more when we are helping each other respond to a need. And then they don't have to be out on the street at 8 o'clock the next morning. They can sleep in if they want. They can come downstairs and have a good breakfast before they have to go out. They can't book the room or their bed or cot for the next 3 months, but they can come back in before it gets too dark or too scary out there on the street for them. That's only touching a bit of the need. There are many people out there who need that kind of support. My bias is towards women because I think we're more vulnerable on the street, but you know, the need is also great among men, and particularly gender diverse men too. So.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. That was definitely a loaded question. So I appreciate everyone's input. Yeah, connectivity is such an important aspect of fostering well-being. So I truly agree with that. Okay, so are there any aspects of this issue that are specific or unique to London and the surrounding area?
I don't know whether it's unique to London, but there's certainly a lot of these women, because of the trauma and past experiences, live with varying degrees of mental illness, depression, whatever. And they need one-on-one care as you walk with them. They certainly come to social things and they like that, but many of them do not have well-developed social skills. So you need somebody to kind of help them, bring them in. Some days they want to talk, some days they don't want to talk. Probably no different than some of us on a good day or a bad day, but I think the degree of mental illness from the trauma that they have experienced make that and there aren't very many places who will provide the staff and the space for these people to come. Libraries are getting better at it. And I'm glad to see that libraries are not just a place you go to borrow a book and bring it back 2 weeks later after you read it. Libraries are becoming a service to respond to multiple needs in the community. And I think that's a very positive direction.
I'm not sure if this is unique or not, but the number of people who are unhoused or, unhoused were were documented around 260 in London 5 or 6 years ago. And it's 10 times that now. It's 10 times. So it's over 2,500 people are unhoused, and not just insecurity of housing, it's unhoused. So I'm sure that other communities have, a similar experience, but I think it's shocking, and we're not keeping up. Obviously, we're not keeping up because a lot of those folks are sleeping outside and don't have, there's like my sister's place has a beautiful place with, I think they've got 10 or 12 beds, Joan.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really lovely. I mean, that service is beautiful, but we need way, way, way more. And just to say that when I mentioned to some of the women yesterday for the All Our Sisters women that I was going to be here, and what was the one message that any of them had that they wanted us to relay, and this is always the message. I still ask them every time. The message is always the lack of safety, the incredible lack of safety for women identified, gender diverse folks to be unhoused, which is why lots of them like to continue to try and hide in their homelessness. But it's extreme. They have extreme experiences of sexual violence, physical violence, emotional, psychological, all kinds of violence. It's extreme. And one woman in particular was just expressing it over and over again. And you need to make sure that folks know that this is what our experience is. And so I'm going to pass that message on to make sure. And I know that that's not, again, unique to London, but these women that we met with yesterday, they're unique to London. And that's their experience, and any opportunity to let folks know what that experience is. The other thing that sometimes people talk about, and I'm not sure where this fits in, but it's language. And whenever we ask the folks that we work with or that we spend time with, do you like this word or this word to describe your experience of being unhoused or homeless? For the most part, they don't care what language we use. What they care about is having a nice place to call home. What they care about is having folks to support them with whatever those difficult, challenging issues are that they're experiencing: mental health, physical health, addiction, all of those things, family issues, not having their kids, all of that trauma. They don't worry about the language so much. What they worry about is action. And, when will there be homes? And, lots of the women that we see at All Our Sisters who come to the meetings, those are women who are housed right now. They've experienced, as Joan said, lots of experience of trauma and being unhoused or insecurity of housing. But anyway, I wanted to get that out before, because I promised.
Yeah, and I guess I'm working the St. Thomas-Elgin County. So we have a few different it's very much similar, but our population's smaller as a whole, and it makes it easier to have that one-on-one and more available to people. But the reality is, we're seeing that like you're talking about in the housing, the in deinstitutionalization, particularly in St. Thomas, we see that still with, families. Like for an example, like there's been times where we see two generations of a family, adults, but that are at shelter at the same time.
Mhm.
Like they haven't been living together, whatever, they both end up there. And that just speaks to the cycle and the lack of resources that have been there, especially for the stability and the remaining housed. And I'm glad to say St. Thomas was able to um, get some positions when it comes to, meeting with people in their homes when they're newly housed or if things are not going well, making sure they're having in-home, meetings, making sure they have what they need, like, because we were seeing a lot of returns, and we do, for a variety of reasons, but to help reduce this, we were able to receive funding for that. And not the inn, but the community like social services. But so I'm very hopeful about that. But it's tough because we have had a lot of good things happening, but underneath that, because we are a low barrier shelter, so whatever that means to us is, we try and meet people where if you're under the influence of a substance, you can come in. We're not you can't use inside, but on our property, we're just going to keep an eye on you, like for many people, women can't go to another women's shelter or a shelter that has children in because of their, whatever symptom of their mental health is, preventing, them from receiving that service or substance use. Um, we do have, a separate women's dorm, and that's great. But the reality is, a lot of the women that live at shelter, or, are precariously housed, they are living alongside people that have previously harmed them or continue to. And that's
Mhm.
something that it bothers me deeply. And, it's a very like a personal goal as alongside organizationally, how how do we address those situations? We listen, we talk, but people are at a point of fear where even if they wanted to, where did they really go? It's a small town, you could walk down the street and you see someone, right? So that's a challenge for sure. But
Mhm.
yeah, and it's like a vendetta of mine for sure to like help address those things. But we have a lot of great things happening in our community around, new supportive housing being built and affordable housing. But that's still like a few years down the road, right? And we've, hoping to see more stability. And I think Built for Zero, we are, part of that. And we're really proud to have, functional zero veterans homelessness, and we had a 30% reduction in chronic homelessness, which is really, really great. It was a lot of hard work, coordination in our community for years, especially prior to me being there even, like it's a labor of love, but the problem is, you can't catch up sometimes, right? Like
Mhm. Yeah.
we are still seeing, we reduced chronic homelessness that much, but doesn't mean there's not the same number of people on our by names data list or our coordinated access, right? We continue to see an inflow of people for a variety of reasons, and there's increases to, seniors, and LBQ youth, and, women too that have just ran out of places to stay or, are just truly don't have anywhere to go or are trying to leave a situation where, they've been living with someone and they're being taken advantage of or, that's a big issue in our community too. So things are looking good and they are, and there's so much to celebrate, but the underlying current of violence and trauma, particularly towards women and genderized people in our community, is still very much there. And we see it, and it's we always work with people to, how would we, support you? But that answer isn't clear when you're in a state of, survival, you might not even know what's out there if you've never been, had the privilege of having, safety in your life, right? So you don't even know what that looks like sometimes. So yeah, so
I think it's approaching this issue of homelessness from the other side. Um, every community, probably right across the country, has some people who are homeless. But the statistics on that from community to community are never really, revealed to the community. So if, as Shelley says, maybe there's 10,000 people who are are unhoused, I can walk along the river and see many of them, trying to stay warm with a tent or whatever. And those are very dangerous and precarious situations they're in. And if somebody dies while they're in one of those places or spots, those they don't have to reveal their names, but the numbers. I think as a city, as a town, wherever, we should know how many people we're losing because of the lack of housing, the support that is needed. Instead, what we seem to be doing at governmental levels, whether that's at the federal, provincial, or local levels, is we want to spend as little money as possible to uh, not make this look too bad for us. And I think we need to talk more openly about the problem. And I know everybody approaches it from what they are trying to protect and keep, whether it's their home or their backyard or their business or whatever. But I think if we're going to be a community that grows in our capacity to care for each other, that we need to know how big the issues are and invite members of the community to at least, have a suggestion box to put ideas out, because we just keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results.
Yeah.
And I think somebody a whole lot smarter than me said that's just stupidity. And I don't mean that to trash people who are working in government or in other agencies. I just think that surely at this point in our evolution as human beings, we can do better than that. And that's what I would like to, from the other side, name that. But it's rare that that is ever revealed. And I think it should be. I think it would shock some people.
Don't get me started, Joan.
Hey, so you guys have discussed women a fair amount. So can you tell us about how gender impacts youth? So, for example, how queer youth are disproportionately represented among the homeless youth population?
I guess that's somewhat relevant to, not only my endeavors for volunteering, but also at my work at the shelter. Because St. Thomas has its own youth homelessness protocol. So I'm not sure fully about London's processes, but 16 to 24-year-old youth, we have a diversion process. So if someone presents in the community or is that precarious, we activate that protocol. And then, whatever resource available, we work through it, and we try our best to divert from homelessness or get someone somewhere as safe as possible. And, the reality is right now, with the youth I, work with and also volunteer with, because there is an intersection with the, youth I volunteer with that also have experiences of homelessness, even that don't even, get into the system, so to speak. So, some of the things they talk about in their experience of why, they can't be home or what is home to them. Um, you know, some I've seen a little bit of a shift in it around, I'll just keep quiet, I'll keep my identity, I'll suffer through this to just stay inside. And I think, and it, you know, I see more now sometimes that youth are unwilling to, be in that, they need to be who they are. And I think that's fantastic. But I see in some situations more often, like with that, then they get rejected. They're out of their home or it's unsafe for them to be home, whether because of whoever's in their home is threatening, whatever, abusive. And, it's I'm seeing an increase in that. And unfortunately and broadly in our society, there's, a uprising of bigotry and transphobia, more than, it's always been there. And, I see it probably a lot more than some, just because of who I am and, what I do. But I appreciate the unwillingness to not to be like the willingness to take that bravery to be yourself, knowing that you can't, you know, be where your home is. And that's kind of one aspect of it. But there's a lot of layers and each person's just unique, but that's like one thing I'm seeing is like people don't want to hide, and I think that's fantastic, but that creates you know, different ways to address it.
I think there used to be, when I was working in Toronto, there was an alternative high school for kids who just couldn't fit in. Now, probably many of them were gay or bisexual or whatever, but there were all kinds of reasons why. But I think to be able to provide places where these folks can show up and do the learning and gain skills, and that will allow them to, well, I guess, flourish as they continue to grow and mature and develop skills that they can provide for themselves. It's not a perfect system, but and there are a few places where that is happening, even at YOU, where there are tutors where these kids can, if they've dropped out of school, they encourage them to go back. They find out what they're interested in, and they work with them, whether it takes them 6 months to complete a course or whether it takes 6 years before they get their diplomas. Doesn't matter. It's about them feeling that they are worth something, they can accomplish something, they can do, they can provide for themselves and for a future for themselves. I think the education system fails a lot of this population, male and female, who just can't make it in the usual education system. There was a teacher who taught at OIC in Toronto, which is the Education Institute. And he taught these kids who were having a terrible time, and many of them were not learning much, and they were just, year after year, they're the losers in the class and whatever. Well, none of us want to wear a label like that. He took on this group of kids, and there was about 20 of them, and they lived all over the area where the school where he taught was. but he would call them every morning. And many of them grew up in families where both parents were working. Either they worked nights and they weren't home yet to go to bed, and the other parent was already off to work. So these kids were pretty much on their own and not doing well. And he said he would call them. He said, "I'll meet you at this subway stop, and we'll pick up the kids." And by the time they got to the school, there would be at least 15 of them that showed up for school. And what he did after the first term, he gave every single child that he taught, he gave them a diploma just for showing up. These kids had never got a diploma on anything. They had been unsuccessful in just about everything they did. And they were so proud of this little piece of paper that said they did something successfully. And then he continued to work with them as they grew through high school. And many of them at the end graduated with some skills, some opportunities that they could work. I think it isn't just providing shelter, it's providing an environment that is big enough that this population can find themselves somewhere in that and are welcomed for who they are, not because, you know, they got straight A's last year in whatever grade they were in. They got a diploma just for showing up, which, you know, seems silly to some of us, but actually was a huge incentive for these people to come back again and wanting more.
Yeah, and if I, oh, sorry, before I get the thought out of my head, that reminds me, earlier we were talking about identity and belonging, and, that's a big aspect of, that feeling of rejection, that people who have, come out or, are have had to have that experience where they were rejected by society, someone they love. Like that is a deep trauma for some people. And, that doesn't leave people, like you have, speaking, not for everybody, but generally, that trauma of, who are you? Well, you're wrong for just existing the way you are. Like that is something that's been difficult, even when a youth is doing well, that underlying sense of rejection or there's something wrong with you, for who you are. Although I do have to shout out some of the good things happening in St. Thomas for youth. There is a Rainbow Connections Hub that have seen a lot of traffic, so we're really happy about that. But there's just belonging is such a big piece of you know wellness and humanity, because who are we without each other, really,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
Mhm. I don't feel like I can add a whole lot, I think, to that. There's probably lots more to add to it. I know that there are, Ray, you're probably doing partnering. I don't know if you have time to partner with folks in London to find out what's going on here. And YOU is the big organization that provides really wonderful services for youth and in whoever they happen to be and how they show up, with shelters now and outreach and housing and all kinds of really wonderful services. I mean, that doesn't mean that all youth are the needs of all youth are being met through, one organization. I think that there are some other ones. In my experience working in a women's shelter, we considered women to be, 16 and over sometimes. And to say that a 16 or 17-year-old young woman, or 18 even, would fit into a women's and children's shelter um, was, pretty challenging because their needs are completely different than the needs of women who have children or even single women who are older. I mean, they found that younger people were annoying and because their needs were different, because their sleep times are different, their music is different, what they eat, and so on, um, and who they are and how they express themselves. So it's really important that we do have services that meet those unique needs of young people who show up however they choose to show up. And actually, I think we're trying. It's not my. I did work with youth for quite a while, but it's not my expertise anymore. And I haven't worked in shelter for 5 years, so and lots of things have happened in that 5 years. So I'm not quite sure. Lots of good things have happened too, related to services for youth. So yeah.
All right. That builds a beautiful bridge into my last question. Are shelters equipped to support people of different gender identities, creating safe or unsafe environments for them?
Well, um, I think that lots of shelters probably are still operating in the old ways. They haven't been able to keep up for lots of different reasons, and you can blame funding. Um, you have to be able to turn on a dime, honestly, because the needs of folks change so rapidly. Even this last 5 years, the needs of individuals seeking shelter have changed rapidly, and we're not able to meet those needs, just numbers alone, but still, what people need once they're in shelter, the supports that they need. And often it comes down to the number of beds, the amount of money we have, the number of staff we're able to put in, service at a particular time. So I feel like we can't keep up. Um, and somehow we set all the plans. It takes us too long to develop plans, whether they're our strategic plans organizationally or our community plans. We spend so much time working on them. Even though they're not supposed to be written in stone, we spend a lot of time working on them. And then by the time we set them in place, things have moved along. Governments have changed, policies have changed. You have to be able to move fairly quickly, and and it's who's sitting in those chairs and how quickly they're able to make those changes, and whether they want to or not, because it's the will of folks. So I feel like there are some shelters that are meeting the needs and want to, um, but they can't keep up. Yeah.
Yeah, the need is greater. And I think plans have to be revised on a fairly regular basis because the culture is changing in which all of us live. Even what the pandemic did to the everybody's lives were turned upside down. And we just picked up old plans and tried to say, well, we'll start this up again. And
Yeah.
I think we realized that many of us have been profoundly affected by that. And the politics of your town or city or country or whatever, all of that is in such almost chaos sometimes. And I think that has an impact because nothing feels certain. Will there be a tomorrow that I can work towards? So I think all of those things are having an impact on organizations that are trying to respond to some of the most vulnerable people in our towns and cities who need care, who need compassion, who need time, and we're not doing as well as I think we could do.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of my area of passion is how do we make it as comfortable or you know, in helpful as possible with our service for every person. And the reality is it's not possible to satisfy every person in general ever, but we need to try our best. So one of the, ways when so the inn was just in a church basement for a while. COVID really helped us get to a point where we're a 24/7 shelter in a building that was renovated. And part of that renovation did include a men's dorm, women's dorm, and then we have flex spaces. So those are just smaller dorms that maybe have, one bunk bed, two bunk beds that we can just, place people as, fits what the needs are. And it's not always about gender. Often it's about, safety or other vulnerabilities, accessibility, whatever that may be. But there's many layers to changing, attitudes within your organization, even. And when I actually started working, prior to having a program manager role, caseworker role, one of the first things when I entered the workplace was I was like, we have a lot of work to do. You know, we think we all have a big heart, for the most part in this work. We all want to help people, but there's so many underlying, biases, stereotypes that we're preventing, that feeling of, beyond just, well, I care, but don't talk about it. Don't, that attitude was something that needed to be, addressed from like top down. And part of that was training staff, and writing processes, policies that backed up,
Yeah.
creating as safe as possible space. So even if you have policies that say, based on your gender idea and identity, you're a woman, you can stay in the women's dorm if that's, not feeling safe based on where you're at, or, if we're worried about them actually being unsafe because of individuals bullying them or whatever, harassing them, we can utilize a flex space, but we don't want to automatically assume someone that's, trans wants to be in a gender neutral space. Actually, people would appreciate their identities to be respected and, validated by being able to stay in the space that fits their gender. Um, so part of we can have that on paper, but the reality is you have to have your staff have to be trained and have to understand those things and know how to address things when they come up and address their own biases and their own opinions that, might not be informed by, just knowing, some people just have never been exposed to this, so their opinion is only formed by, whatever they've seen, and that's never good. We need to listen, we need to talk about these things. So from an organizational perspective, you need to make sure your leadership is on board. You need to make sure your staff are trained and know how to address these things and create a comfortable environment as much as possible. And then on top of that, you have to make sure individuals that might be experiencing harassment because of their sexuality or gender or, targeting, you have to make sure you're addressing that as well. And that is probably the most difficult piece because there's like 20 people in a dorm. We have smaller dorms because they're a smaller community, but um, if, anything can happen, we monitor whatever, but, bullying and targeting, whatever you have, it's hard, the hardest thing to address because people won't tell you generally because, who am I to someone that's come into you as our services? They don't know me. Why should they trust me, right? So why would they come to me with the deepest, the fear they're having or the discomfort, right? Like, so it has to be many layers of making sure you're, staying up to date too, because we continuously update, based on sometimes a situation will occur and we're like, oh, we wouldn't have even thought of that. So let's adjust our process. Let's relook at this. Let's continue to build upon the foundation of, acceptance and, validating people's experiences. But yeah, it takes a long time to shift that, especially if, the other clients, you can't really control that. You can only issue, your shelter break or your warrant, about bullying or harassment or whatever. So, there's things out of your control. So, in, my opinion, you can't say, oh, this is a safe space because we have a policy that says, we respect everybody's identity and gender and we'll validate it, and try and our best to keep you safe. But the reality is you can't guarantee that because things are out of your control, in some areas. So you have to know how you're going to address it and to continue to build upon that. So my long answer, wrapped up is, you can be equipped, but it's an ongoing process. And there will always be situations you need to address uniquely. And you can't, think of every single thing all at once. You need to work with people, you need to understand the needs. And, it's just an ongoing process of reflection and addressing things, right? But you gotta start from the top and then continue to just reinforce it and set the expectations for your team and for your other clients around.
Thanks,
All right.
thanks for that, Ray. Sounds like you're doing really wonderful work, and I know how complex it can be every moment, every day, trying to keep everybody feeling safe in where they want to be. Thank you.
Okay. Joan, did you get a chance to speak?
I've said quite a bit.
Okay. All right. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
just in conclusion, I think not just providing one of the multiple needs these people have. And part of it is working with them to help them identify some of those needs and then to be creative in maybe how some of it can be responded to. And it isn't all up to us to solve the pain and trauma that they may have been through, but to realize that they have resources within themselves that they can learn and develop and grow and draw on. So those are my final comments.
Amazing. Okay, so that's everything we had planned for today. Thank you, Ray, Shelley, and Joan for joining us tonight and sharing your insights. Before we call it a night, does anyone have any additional questions or even just thoughts on the topics discussed? Amanda, Jeff, anybody? If not, I guess this is goodbye. Thanks for joining, everyone. Oh,
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. I really appreciate everyone's knowledge.
Yeah.
Great. Take
And
care.
have a
Okay.
great night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.